Somebody's got to be the bad guy, right? Those are the words that this defendant, Adam Bennefield, spoke as he sat in a truck waiting for his opportunity to attack. His opportunity to take matters into his own hands, his opportunity to murder his wife, Kiara. And just 2 hours later, he got his chance and he took it. He T-boned the car she was driving with her 3 little kids in it. He grabbed the loaded shotgun he had brought with him. He forced Kiara to open the door, and then he murdered her. He shot her right through the head, right in front of her 3 children. Then he took off. He led police on a high-speed chase. He hit cars, he drove on lawns and sidewalks. He went the wrong way on busy roads until he managed to get away from the police. He ditched the truck, he ditched the shotgun, he tried to ditch accountability for what he had done. But at that, he failed. After hiding out for an entire week, this defendant was caught, and now he faces this trial, he faces witnesses, he faces evidence that will prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. On October 5th of 2022, at about 8:30 in the morning over on Shawnee and Richlawn Avenues here in the city of Buffalo, this defendant committed the crimes of murder in the 2nd degree, endangering the welfare of those 3 children, and aggravated criminal contempt. Those are the crimes that we will prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Murder in the 2nd degree, that this defendant intended to cause the death of Kiara Bennefield, also known as Kiara Hudson, and that he did in fact cause her death by shooting her. Endangering the welfare of a child, 3 counts, 1 for each of the 3 children who were in the vehicle. That this defendant knowingly acted in a manner likely to be injurious to the physical, mental, or moral welfare of 3 children who were all under the age of 17. In fact, they were all less than 10 years old. And aggravated criminal contempt, that this defendant knowingly and intentionally disobeyed the lawful mandate of the Town of Cheektowaga Justice Court, an order of protection issued by Judge James Spire on October 4th, 2022, by causing serious physical injury to Kiara Bennefield, also known as Kiara Hudson, on whose behalf such order was issued, by shooting her. Now, those are the charges against this defendant, the legal language of the crimes. What you are about to see and hear in this courtroom is the evidence that will prove each one of them beyond a reasonable doubt. So what is our proof? What happened on October 5th? This is what the evidence will show. On October 4th, just 1 day before the murder, a judge in the Town of Cheektowaga issued an order of protection which prohibited this defendant from having any contact with his wife, Kiara Bennefield. This order prohibited the defendant from assaulting her, stalking her, harassing her, among other things. The defendant received that order in court. He signed his name on it. The judge explained it to him, and he acknowledged that he knew he was to have absolutely no contact with her whatsoever. That night, Kiara and her 3 children stayed with her mother over on Marigold Avenue here in the city of Buffalo, in an area of the city not far from Sisters Hospital. On the morning of October 5th, Kiara put her 3 kids into the car to drive her oldest child to school in Cheektowaga, which is where their home was. Giselle Hodge, who was just 9 years old, sat buckled in the front seat next to her mother. Behind Giselle was her baby brother, Adam Jr., who they call Busy, who was about 6 months old. He was in an infant car seat. Behind Kiara sat Giselle's little sister, Zariah, who was 5 years old, and she was buckled into a car seat also. Kiara pulled out unaware that the defendant was sitting nearby in a truck, waiting for his chance to strike. In fact, the defendant had been sitting down the block for several hours. And how do we know this? Because as he sat there, the defendant was recording himself on video on his phone. recording himself complaining about his wife, complaining about how he was being mistreated, complaining about how he was such a good guy and that he was being persecuted. He said all sorts of terrible things about Kiara in an attempt to justify what he was about to do. To him, Kiara was a problem. To him, she was a bad wife, a bad mother. But rather than separate, rather than divorce and move on, he chose to take matters into his own hands. He chose to eliminate his problem by killing her. It's not clear who the intended audience was or why he made those videos, but those recordings go from about 5:30 in the morning until about 6:30. And the phone puts his location right on Marigold Avenue, just 2 hours before he murdered Kiara. Now, as Kiara pulled out, drove around the block due to the one-way streets, the defendant took up his position. When Kiara reached the intersection of Shawnee and Richlawn Avenues, the defendant struck, literally. He drove his truck right into her car, hitting the side where Kiara and Zariah sat. Without even putting the truck in park, he jumped out with a loaded shotgun and went straight to Kiara's door. She tried to back up. She tried desperately to get away, but was unable to. The defendant pounded on her door and window with the shotgun until she opened it. And when she did, he shot her, at least twice. One shot hit her left shoulder. The other went through Kiara's head, entering on the right side and exiting out the left. A shotgun blast at close range. You learn that Kiara was wearing a bulletproof vest. The defendant was aware of that and ready for that. He shot her where she was completely vulnerable, right in her head. He shot her where he knew he would kill her. Now, through some miracle, none of the children was physically injured by the shotgun blasts or by the defendant crashing into the car. But as they sat, still strapped into their seats, their mom lay dead, half in and half out of the car. The defendant then took the shotgun, got into his truck, and fled. He left his wife, whom he had just killed. He left the 3 children alone in the middle of the street with her body. He left to get away with what he had just done, to escape, to avoid getting caught. Now, members of the jury, what I just described to you, you will see with your own eyes. This incident, this murder, was captured by a video camera on a nearby house, and you will see that shortly. You'll also hear from Giselle Hodge, who turned 12 just last week. She'll tell you what she saw this defendant, her stepfather, do to her mother. That it was this defendant who shot her mother as she sat just a few feet away. Now, that evidence by itself would be proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but there is much more. As the defendant fled in his truck after murdering Kiara, a Buffalo police officer on routine patrol drove up. He thought he was seeing the result of a bad accident, so he called for an ambulance. Then, when the defendant took off, the officer followed, thinking he had seen a hit and run. The officer followed the defendant around one-way streets and winding roads in the area. Other officers joined in. The defendant struck a police car, drove on lawns, hit a fence, all in a desperate attempt to get away. He drove the wrong way on Humboldt Parkway and then on the 198, which was busy with rush hour traffic. The police had to call off the chase for their own safety and for the safety of other drivers and pedestrians. But they continued to search for the truck. Back at the murder scene, Giselle got her baby brother and little sister out of the car. A woman who lived nearby heard the crash and the gunshots. She then heard children crying, so she went outside in her bathrobe and slippers and took the 3 kids into her home. Once safely inside, but still shaken from what they had just witnessed, the 2 girls identified the killer, their stepfather, Adam Bennefield. Other neighbors and drivers came out to see what happened, to see if they could help. An off-duty Buffalo fire marshal who lives on Richlawn came out and went up to Kiara. He checked to see if she had a pulse, but she did not. and seeing the injury to her head, he knew that she was beyond help, that no life-saving measures would do any good. That same man shared the video from his home with the police, and that's what you will see this morning. Buffalo police began arriving. First on the scene was a patrol officer named Michael Goodspeed. He learned that the children had been taken into a home and went to check on them. Once inside, he saw that while they were shaken, they appeared physically unharmed. He asked the older girl, Giselle, who had done this, and she replied, "My stepdad," and then gave the name Adam Bennefield. Within just minutes of the murder, the police knew they were looking for this defendant. Officer Goodspeed put the defendant's name out over his police radio. Now, other information was gathered as well. When he crashed into Kiara and the children, the defendant left part of his front bumper on the ground, along with the truck's front license plate. A police officer called in the plate number, and it came back to a gray Ford F-150 registered to Elva Bennefield, the defendant's mother, with an address on Cornwall Avenue, not very far away. A short time later, Buffalo police officers checked the address, spoke to the defendant's parents to see if he was there. They indicated that he was not. Now, just 20-some minutes after the murder, the police located the gray Ford F-150 that the defendant had abandoned. He had tried to hide it under a pedestrian bridge on Humboldt Parkway next to a church. The defendant was nowhere to be found, but he left valuable evidence behind. Paperwork with his name on it, a blanket with his name on it, a card with a family court date written on it for the very next day, October 6th. A soft-sided shotgun carrying case was on the front passenger seat. And tossed near a chain-link fence just a few feet away was a shotgun, likely the murder weapon. The truck was missing part of the front bumper and the front license plate. The license plate that was still attached to the rear of the truck matched the ones that officers had found back at the murder scene. The right rear tire was shredded, simply a rim remained. Other damage to the truck was observed, damage this defendant caused during his desperate flight from police. This was the same truck seen on the video of the murder, the same truck officers had followed, and the same truck this defendant used to commit the murder and then flee from the scene. Now, what else was found in the truck? The defendant's phone. He left behind the phone which he had used a few hours earlier to record his grievances. When he fled, he left behind the phone that gave us those videos and his location. Left it right there in the driver's seat. Back at the murder scene, police recovered 2 fired shotgun shells from the ground near the victim's body. They saw that part of the driver's side window was shattered, and police observed other damage to the vehicle's windows and side panels consistent with pellets, things that are fired out of a shotgun when it's fired. Evidence of blood and brain tissue was also in the truck. At Kiara's autopsy, pellets and wadding were found in her head. And you'll hear that these are components of a shotgun cartridge, what comes out of the shotgun when it's fired. The bulletproof vest that she had desperately but futilely worn was also recovered at autopsy. The cause of death was the gunshot wound to Kiara's head. Now, for a week, the police searched for the defendant. They checked his home address, he wasn't there. They checked his parents' address, he wasn't there. But finally, a week later, on October 12th of 2022, they found him. They located him near St. Luke's Mission of Mercy riding on a pink bicycle. And when Detective Joseph Paskowitz of the Marshals Task Force approached the defendant and identified himself, the defendant took off running. Fortunately, there were several other officers in the area, and they were able to apprehend the defendant 1 week after the crime. Now, that is the evidence that you will see and hear during this trial. To be clear, you're not here to decide if the victim or the defendant were good people or not, whether they had a good marriage or not, whether things could have been handled differently. This case is not complicated. Tragic, yes, but not complicated. As you listen to the evidence, don't go looking for things that aren't there. Don't assume that there's something more going on here. Focus on the facts before you. This is not a mystery to be solved. It's accusations to be proven. And we will prove this defendant's guilt clearly, decisively, and beyond a reasonable doubt. At the end, you won't need any more evidence, won't need any more witnesses, won't need DNA. You will have everything you need to be confident in your verdict. At the end of the case, we will ask you to find this defendant guilty of murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and aggravated criminal contempt. We will ask you to hold this defendant responsible for the choices he made and accountable for the actions that he took. And the evidence you see and hear during this trial will enable you to do that and to do justice. Thank you.
It's brutal. What happened is horrible. No doubt about it. This is as bad as it gets, and there is a lot of emotion. And there should be a lot of emotion because we are human. But that is not why we are here. You are not being asked whether this is horrible. That is not the issue. The issue is whether Mr. Bennefield is guilty of these charges. Has the prosecution proven that he is guilty? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not guilty means not proven guilty. Mr. Bennefield is presumed innocent. These legal principles mean nothing if juries do not apply them to the most serious cases, to cases like these. I ask you not to be swayed by emotion and the horrible story you just heard from the prosecution. Again, we know that what happened is brutal and wrong. That is not what this case is about. Please listen closely to the judge's instructions, and please give this case the attention that it deserves. Consider carefully the quality of the proof, and please think about the evidence that is missing and what was not done. The presumption of innocence does not end when the trial starts. It does not end after the prosecution gives an emotional opening statement about a tragic event. The presumption of innocence continues until and unless the prosecution presents evidence that proves each and every element of the charged crimes. Thank you.